This happened about 5 years ago in Kyoto, the former capital of Japan. I had an office job, and sometimes the hours weren't as flexible as I'd like them to be. Us workers would usually have to stay until the projects we owned were complete. I didn't mind doing it. I suppose it was just hard to have any constants in my life. Because I didn't have a pretty steady routine, I decided to do something about it. I made a commitment to myself. I would take a walk after work around this forest trail area close to my neighborhood, no matter what time I finished that day. Now, because on average I finished pretty late, and this forest trail was out in the sticks, I didn't usually run into any people along my walk. But that all changed one night, when I ended up encountering someone stood by the side of the forest trail. He was a man of medium build. He wore dark clothes, and the striking thing about this guy was the way he just stood there. In a word, he was motionless. I felt as if there was something off about that guy from the moment that I saw him. He gave me the creeps, and I didn't like the idea of passing him in the middle of that forest in the dark. I didn't want to go anywhere near him, but if I turned back and went the way I came, I would add another 30 minutes onto my walk. And I didn't want to do that. I remember physically trying to stop my hands from shaking. I was all tensed up. I felt for sure like he was about to do something as I passed him, but fortunately, he didn't. It was as if he didn't even realize I walked past him. I hadn't been out on my routine walks due to the terrible weather we had been having in the area in the following days. And of course I didn't do my routine walk on the weekend, so I kind of forgot about it. I got back on the trail again, and to my shock I ended up meeting the man stood by the side of the trail again, 4 days after our first encounter. He was stood there in the exact same spot I saw him in before. It was an unusually clear night. The moon was full, and it illuminated the forest trails well. Thanks to the moon being so bright that night, I was able to see that strange guy before I got anywhere near him. So I was able to turn back and keep my footsteps quiet. I didn't really want to be anywhere near him. He was once again motionless, and he had this vacant look on his face. Why was he out there? Because of him, I quit that nightly routine that I had. I just didn't feel like going walking anymore. About 2 weeks go by, and I'm reading the newspaper in the office break room, and I get another shock. An article said that a body had been found in the forest, and the police believe that there had been a murder. I remembered that strange man, and I thought, no way. Could he be behind it? I did think that it could be likely, but overall, probably more unlikely than likely. I was so curious though. I couldn't get it off my mind, so I decided one Sunday morning to head back to the trail. I found the area that the police had cordoned off. There was police tape and a detour set up. The place that was covered by white tarp and was hidden to the public was the very place I saw that man stood by the side of the trail. When I saw that, I got shivers, and I turned back and went home. It might not be related at all, but another strange thing happened. I ended up with insomnia, and I couldn't sleep for a while without taking sleeping pills. I think I must have had a close call that day. The day I passed that man. He might have been the culprit. Or was it that I passed by the victim, wanting to be found? Or was it neither? I don't think I'll ever know. I want to tell you about something that happened last weekend. Since it was a Friday night and I didn't have work the next day, I decided to head to the convenience store after work to grab some booze and some snacks for a night in. For some reason, I didn't walk my usual way home from the station. I chose to go a different route. I don't know why I did this. Maybe it will make sense later. I had a vague idea of where I was heading, so I thought I wouldn't get lost. Let me explain my usual route home a little here. After I leave the convenience store, I go straight for a while, and then I turn right. But that night, I went straight, and then I turned left. It just felt right to do. I was walking down the street, and I found a corner which turned left. I took that left. The street I turned onto was really weird. It looked like it belonged to a different era. There were wooden houses either side of the street. And even the street poles were ancient looking. They were wooden too. The electrical poles were wooden instead of metal. They had these old style ones. I thought they were obsolete. The street looked like it belonged in the 50s. I kept walking. I didn't see a single house with its lights on. It was night, so I expected to see some light from the houses. It was weird. It made it look like every house on the street had been abandoned. There was no sign of life here. But at least there was street light. I kept going as I was curious. I approached a house further down the street, which seemed a little different to the others. It had a large garden. All the shutters were closed on this house. I don't know if it was abandoned or not, because I could see well-maintained trees and bushes in the garden. There were numerous flower pots, large and small. Trees were growing out of them. I looked closer and I realized that they weren't the beginning of trees or bushes. They weren't branches. From a distance you could be forgiven for thinking so, but up close, it was clear that these were hands. They weren't human hands, though. They were mannequin hands. I saw them there in the flower pots, and I felt horrible. The sight of those hands evoked a fear in me. I turned around instantly and headed back towards the convenience store. Something was wrong here. Okay, so you're probably thinking that this experience isn't all that strange, right? Well, I headed out of the convenience store at 8:40, and when I got back there again, it was almost 11 p.m. I know that I'm not wrong about this because I still had the receipt in my pocket. How the hell did 2 hours pass in the time it took me to walk halfway down a street? It really creeped me out. I couldn't get the image of those mannequin fingers growing out of the plant pots out of my mind. Those white fingers grasping towards the full moon in a place that didn't seem real. I didn't feel like having just a little drink after all of that. I wanted to drink as much as possible. I can tell you now that I didn't get to bed sober that night. The next day I woke with a sore head, but with more clarity. I wanted to see that street again, so I walked back to the convenience store to go and find it. I was wondering if it was as creepy in the day as it was at night. I wondered if I would lose time again, if I went down it. I took a watch with me this time. I must have paced up and down every street and alley in the area, and I couldn't find the same street again. I found the point where I turned left, but there was no turning that day. I looked on different map apps. I couldn't find it anywhere. It was like it never existed. To be honest, I'm glad I didn't find it. Those hands in the plant pots were weird enough. Who knows what would have been waiting for me further down the street. I don't think I'll go looking for it. I'm scared of missing time, too. This happened when I was in elementary school, a long time ago. I used to be part of this school club called Forestry School. They held lots of events for kids, and this experience takes place when I was in year 6. They had this one event, which was a 2-night trip to stay out in the elements. We would be sleeping out in the forest in the shade of the mountains, in a place called the Something Boys Nature House, something like that. I can't remember at the moment. It seemed really fun at the time though. All us kids pitched in to make dinner that evening. It was really great, and it didn't feel like a chore at all. It was a curry, and it tasted amazing. After dinner was over, We had a great time, just sat around the campfire. It was a really chill night. But only up until that point. Things went downhill after that. The teacher, or leader, if you will, of the forestry school event told us kids that we would have to take an uphill walk to the dormitory we would be staying in that night. I think he said it was going to be like a 300-meter climb, and that made a few of us kids grumble a little. I think that one of the teachers picked up on this and tried to make the uphill walk a little bit more fun by saying it would be a kind of spooky walk, and we should see it as a test of our collective courage to walk up the hill through the forest in the dark. The plan was for us kids to pair up and walk with flashlights. I guess this would allow the teachers to keep attendance of us by head count. Although it was phrased as a kind of spooky walk, there were no hidden surprises. You know, no one was going to jump out on us wearing any creepy costumes or make any wailing sounds in the woods. We had our flashlights in hand, and we were ready to be on our way. There were no streetlights that far out in the woods. I heard from my brother that they did this before, and some of the kids in his group found it pretty scary, so I was looking forward to it. The teachers on the trip were stood at different points on opposite sides of the road, in approximately equal intervals, just in case the students got lost or had any issues. We were lined up by surnames, and I was right at the back because my surname starts with W. I found out that because we had an odd number of students on the trip, that I would be doing the creepy walk alone. The teachers thought that I wouldn't mind since I was a little older than some of the other kids, but to be honest, I would have preferred to have been buddied up with someone. And when I get to the end of my experience, I think you'll understand why that would have been better than going alone. I didn't know why I couldn't be in a 3 instead of being alone. Maybe that was offered to me and I wasn't paying attention, or maybe my teacher didn't think of it. One good thing was, as soon as I passed the first of the 6 teachers at the start of the route, he would follow on behind. The one thing that was annoying was the fact that I had to wait like a good 5 minutes after the last pair before I could start walking. I had to wait as soon as they went up around a right-hand turn and out of sight about 50 meters ahead. I walked along the path swinging my flashlight, left to right, going over the trees and the bushes. It was pretty creepy. It felt like I was the only person out there in the woods that night, despite the fact that I knew I wasn't. After a while, I saw the first teacher at the first curve coming up. I gave him a little nod. As soon as I climbed that right curve, I noticed that there was a sharp incline. There was a guardrail to the left, and beyond that guardrail were lots of trees. I saw another teacher just stood beyond the guardrail. I couldn't really see the teacher's face very well due to how dark it was, and I didn't want to shine my flashlight in his face because I know that hurts your eyes. I didn't recognize that teacher at first, but that wasn't unusual. I didn't know all the teachers on this particular trip. This teacher was stood at the break in the guardrail. There looked to be a forest trail behind where he was stood. It looked like it was the path or the route we should walk down. I thought it was the way to go, so I headed towards him. The teacher started beckoning me to come with him, so I followed. He disappeared down the forest path, and I started behind him. But then I was suddenly stopped in my tracks. Someone behind me shouted my name and I froze. I suddenly felt an adult hand grab me on my shoulder and pull me backwards. I then heard running down the forest trail ahead of me as I was stopped. I turned to face whoever stopped me, and it was the first teacher who was at the first curve. He had a very serious expression on his face. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't say a word. He just walked with me, away from that gap in the guardrail, and towards the dormitory. He didn't exactly tell me what happened that night, and I spent that night thinking I had done something wrong. It wasn't until I was older that I realized the danger of the situation I was in. I think there are a couple of possibilities that could explain my experience, and I would like to ask you for your opinions on my theories. I might have seen some kind of spirit. Some kids I told about my experience said that they saw wilted flowers by the side of the road. Plus, if you think about it, the guardrail having a hole in it might have been caused by an accident at some point in time. It could have been a spirit jealous of the living, trying to lead me away. I don't know. The second, and much more frightening option in my opinion, is that there was a person out there in the woods that night. They might have been aware that there would be kids out there that night, because it was an annual event. I shudder to think what might have happened to me if the actual teacher wasn't behind me, walking up that trail, because I nearly went with a total stranger down a forest trail into the middle of the dark forest. I guess I'll never truly know the answer. When I was younger, one of my close friends lived nearby a pretty big shrine. We used to dare one another back in those days, and one night we ended up testing our courage by heading into the shrine late at night. My friend and I knew the layout of the shrine pretty well, so we decided to hide within the shrine grounds to try and freak out our friends who would walk through in pairs. We headed in at around 1 a.m. to wait for our friends. I was talking with my friend in there, trying to decide where the best places to hide would be. After about 15 minutes, far too long, we saw a flickering light approach. Here we go, I thought to myself. When I was getting ready to do my creepiest voice, I noticed something that didn't seem right. My friends were supposed to be coming in groups of 2, but as the light drew closer, I noticed that it looked like it was just the one person approaching. I smiled to myself because I thought, wow, one of my friends is really trying to show off his masculinity here. I planned on jumping out at him to see how tough he really was. But when the light got closer, I noticed that the silhouette belonged to a woman. I could see her long flowing hair. Now it was just us boys out at the shrine that night, so this was naturally pretty alarming to see. The woman was wearing a white t-shirt and slacks or chinos. She was holding a small pen light in her hand. I looked over at my friend in the dark and saw him hiding. I guess that was the best thing we could do. Hide. I held my breath as she passed us. I didn't want to get caught trespassing. She was about 5 or 6 meters away from us, and she took something out of her bag and started hitting it against the tree. In that moment, I knew exactly why she was here and what she was doing. She was cursing someone through the Ushinokokumairi ritual. It was silent in the shrine apart from the sound of that straw doll rustling, and between the sound of the hammer hitting the nail, I heard the woman muttering, "Die, die, die." It was scary as hell. I was dripping with sweat. I thought stuff like this didn't happen in the real world. Then I realized something. Soon my friends would walk through here, and they won't know that the woman is in here. You know what they say about this ritual: if someone witnesses the cursor during the act, they have to kill the witness. I don't know if that's just an urban legend, but there's a woman out here alone at 1 a.m. with a hammer, performing the ritual, and I was taking 0 risks. I was worried about my friend's safety, so I dug my phone out of my pocket, and I tried my best to keep the bright screen hidden by aiming it at the ground. I typed out a message to my friend group in as few words as possible. "Don't come." And I hit send. I wanted to get the hell out of there as soon as possible. I gestured to my friend who was in the shrine with me. I pointed at the exit. I'm actually really grateful for the moonlight that night. My friend nodded to me, and I was bracing myself for a quick exit. I knew that if he started running, then so would I. Just in that moment, something happened. My cell phone began to ring. I had completely forgotten to set the damn thing on silent mode. Naturally, when you send a message to your friend group like the one I did, you would expect them to make a call or a reply of some sort. I should have muted the phone. I should have even turned it off. So there my friend and I were in the dark, in an almost empty shrine with my ringtone blaring out. It sounded so loud in the dead of night. I took a quick glance over at the woman. She turned around to face us in shock, and that was it. My friend and I started sprinting. We ran a few hundred meters and we didn't hear any footfall following us. I turned back to check, and the woman wasn't chasing us. We kept going until we got all the way back to my friend's house. We messaged our friends group and had the others come meet us there. At first, my friends thought that it was just a prank or a joke we were trying to play on them. But when they saw our faces and how shaken up we probably looked, then I think the reality of the situation sunk in. We decided to abandon our night of dares. It was a real shame for the guys because we had been planning this for ages at school. We really were looking forward to it. We were left with an underwhelming atmosphere in our group. We really didn't know what to do with ourselves. Well, that was until one of my friends came out with this idea. Hey, when it gets a little brighter, let's go back to the shrine and see if we can find the straw doll. All of my friends jumped on this. They loved that idea. I looked at my friend who was in the shrine with me, and I could tell he was thinking the same thoughts as me. Hell no. We were more than reluctant, but in the end we were persuaded by the momentum of our friends. We left my friend's house after a few hours. We were all there for a sleepover. The morning light had illuminated the area. I couldn't forget that woman and how hate-filled and angry she sounded. I was scared to go back, I can't lie. My friends who hadn't experienced what we did were racing up ahead, already entering the shrine grounds. My friends urged us to show them the tree we saw her hammering the nails into the straw doll, and we obliged. When I found the tree, I noticed that there were a few nails sticking out of the bark, but there was no straw effigy. I wondered if the woman quit halfway through the ritual, or if someone who tended the shrine saw it and cleared it away. My friends were all complaining about the situation. They wanted to see something more. I was fine with it, as it was. Relieved, actually. We stood there for a while chatting, and I noticed that my friend, who was in the shrine with me, had fallen silent. His face looked a little pale too. He was seemingly fixed on some spot just over my shoulder, and naturally I turned to look at what he was looking at. He was looking towards a car, which was parked just outside of the shrine grounds. My eyes locked with the glare of the woman we had seen earlier that night. I let out an involuntary kind of gasp. It was loud enough to concern my friends. "It's her! It's her!" I said. Everyone spun around to face the car. We stood there like statues staring at the woman. The car then started and slowly pulled away. All the while the woman stared at us. Needless to say, we ran for it. To be honest, this is where my experience ends. I never saw that woman again, but I was so worried that I would run into her, and she would exact her revenge on me witnessing her ritual. I'll never forget the horror I felt when I turned to see her staring at me and my friends that morning. The feeling of being watched is pretty much my biggest fear these days. And to think that she'd curse someone and want them to die. There was a mean streak in that woman I can't quite adequately express to you, but I'm so glad we got away from her. I'm at work right now, so I will keep this pretty brief. Today I was reminded of something creepy that happened in my office. It all happened about 5 years ago. That was when we moved into this building. I've got to say that from the moment before I got my desk all set up, I felt that something was off about this place. I got a weird vibe, you know? Let me try to explain what I mean. The first thing I noticed was the elevator. It was like it was too modern for this building. It was really high-tech compared to everything else there. Also, in the bathroom, there was a sensor-activated light, which seemed out of place too. I don't know. It was like there was efforts made to replace individual things and not renovate the whole place. It was like the interior didn't match the exterior in places. It was a little weird. I could kind of sense that a lot had happened in this building. It probably was the offices of multiple businesses in the past. I had to do quite a bit of overtime in the coming days after we moved into the new building. I was always fine with doing overtime, so I didn't mind, to be honest. But this was something else. It was more than I'd ever done before. I guess that I wasn't very good at listening to my body at the time because, looking back on it, I was overworking myself. It wasn't just work though. Every time I finished late, I ended up staying up late. I was surviving on less and less sleep. I would stay up late because I needed to eat, shower, and try to mentally switch off for a little while. One day during this busy period, I felt some pretty intense stomach pains at work. I had been feeling rough and worn down, but the stomach pains were a new thing for me. A new concerning thing. I decided to make use of the bathroom on the second floor, because that was the more modern of the two bathrooms. Now normally the bathroom's lights are usually on, but they were off. I guess that was because it was the weekend. Yep, I was at work on a Sunday. It was a dark day. I remember it being in the late stages of autumn, the kind of day where it was dark out early. It was a little eerie, but as soon as I went there, the sensor light picked up on my movement, and it lit up the bathroom. I really shouldn't have been in the office over the weekend, but I was. I had a big project presentation coming up that I needed to work on. That's probably why I was having those stomach pains, come to think of it. My stress levels were elevated. I pushed open the stall door, and I got the shock of my life. There was someone there. Someone I had never seen before. He certainly didn't work in my office. I was so stunned I almost forgot about my stomach. He had white hair, and he seemed kind of old. I remember he was wearing a shabby kind of shirt. It looked to me like he had been wearing it for a while. He was stood with his back facing me. My brain went to autopilot, so I said, "Oh, sorry," or something like that. I was so embarrassed to see someone in there that I didn't really question it. I just closed the stall door and darted out of the bathroom as fast as I could. I headed up another flight of stairs to use the bathroom on the third floor. I guessed that whoever I ran into in the bathroom was doing some overtime too. Halfway up the stairs, my tired and confused mind threw up a question that really woke me up, and the question that cut right through me was, why was the sensor light off if there was someone in the bathroom? The light lit up when I went in. Why didn't it detect his motion? The light usually stays on for ages once someone goes in there, so I didn't really understand. In the end, I guessed that there had been some kind of malfunction with the light. I went home after I got my work done, and nothing else happened that day. Whoever was in the building at the same time as me came and left without my knowledge. Now flash forward a couple of days or maybe weeks, I uncovered some disturbing news. There were rumors about our new building circulating around the office. The rumor that I heard was there was an elderly person who collapsed and died in this building due to overwork. They say that he collapsed in the bathroom, and that was why the previous occupants left. Ever since I heard that rumor, I haven't been able to go anywhere near the bathroom I saw that old guy in. I have been trying to convince myself that he was nothing more than a figment of my imagination, a hallucination conjured up by an overly tired mind. I tried to tell myself that that was what I saw that day, rather than something paranormal, but I just can't shake the feeling it was something more than that. Perhaps if the rumors were true about the old man dying due to overwork, then the reason I saw him might have been some kind of grim premonition of what's in store for me if I carry on overworking myself. I can just imagine him in the bathroom, hyperventilating, sweating, and shaking. I don't know why that image comes to me. He's also clutching at his chest. It makes me realize that I really have to listen to my body more. Since I saw that man, I've tried to make little steps to back away from all the overtime. But it's tough. Oh, and I always use the restroom on the 3rd floor now. I'll be fine. I just gotta get through this next presentation. Hi, Jay here. Did you know in Japanese there's a specific word that describes deaths at work? Karoshi. It literally means overwork death, and is the term used to describe sudden occupation-related deaths. The most common medical causes of death through karoshi are heart attacks, strokes due to stress, malnourishment, or fasting. The mental state of individuals in a hostile or stressful workplace can also be a defining factor and can lead to karo jisatsu. In basic and YouTube-friendly terms, ending it all due to what's going on at work. Having worked in Japan, I can say that the work styles, company culture, and what's expected of employees is of a higher pressure than I'm used to in the West. I am of course just speaking on my own personal experiences though. If you're interested in learning more about karoshi, then I recommend checking out the link in my description. This is an experience that I had that frankly may have ruined my life. It was something so simple, and it wasn't even my fault. It all started one morning while I was waiting for my usual bus to arrive. I had recently started working for a well-known and respected company in my town, and I was proud of my new job. I was a young guy, aged 21, and I was eager to carve out a career for myself. As I was waiting for the bus to arrive, a mother and her daughter walked up and stood close by. The girl was about 4 or 5 years old, and she was clutching what looked like a violin case to her chest. Looks like she's on her way to a lesson, I thought. I then began to overhear their conversation. "I've told you, Mummy can't go with you today. But I'll be there to pick you up later, okay?" "No, I want Mummy to go with me," the little girl says. "No, you have to go by yourself today, okay?" "I can't do it," the little girl replies, sharply. "Yes, you can. Whenever you hear the name of this stop, Fujigaoka, you can get off and go to your lesson. Fujigaoka, okay? You just ring the bell and the driver will stop. You can do it." The mother was getting a little impatient at that point, I felt. I was stood facing the road waiting for the bus, so I turned to take a look at them. I noticed that the little girl was on the verge of tears. Me turning to face them turned out to be a massive mistake on my part, because as soon as I looked their way, the mother seemed to lock eyes with me, and then she said, "Oh, excuse me, are you going past Fujigaoka? Could you do me a favor and ring the bell and make sure she gets off?" The bus just pulled in at that point and was beginning to open its doors. I did what I thought would be a nice thing to do, and I said, "Of course, I'll help." "Hey, look, your big brother's here and he's gonna ride the bus with you. Isn't that great?" she said to her daughter. When her mother said that, the little girl stopped crying and smiled and grabbed my hand. I thought this would be my good deed for the day. Who could deny this simple request? I thought it would all be fine, but you know as well as I do that I wouldn't be sharing my story here if things turned out fine. We climbed the steps and got a seat. The little girl sat next to me and chatted away endlessly. She told me all about her school and her friends and what she likes and dislikes. I, of course, smiled and nodded and asked her little questions of my own. I had had worse rides to work in the morning, let me tell you, so this was a breath of fresh air. Eventually we approached Fujigaoka, and I rang the bell to alert the bus driver. She somehow looked a little sad because I could tell she was enjoying telling me all about her little world. In all honesty, this was the one just before my regular stop. So I asked the little girl, "Are you okay to get off here and get to your class by yourself? You know, like Mummy said." And then it suddenly dawned on her that she was about to be alone again. As the bus slowed to a stop, her bottom lip started wobbling and she began to start whining and forcing tears out from the corners of her eyes. I really didn't want her to make a scene, so I decided to get off the bus and walk with her. I remembered that her mother said it was only about a 5-minute walk. I would still get to work just on time if I took her to her lesson, so I thought I would just do the decent thing. So the little girl took my hand and we left. She stopped her whining and crying almost instantly. She went straight back to telling me all about her little world. About 3 minutes into our walk, we passed a police officer on a bicycle. He took a very sharp glance at me. In that moment I realized that I might have looked a little suspicious to him. A young man in a suit holding the hand of a little girl. And I have a baby face, plus if you couple that with the fact that I was 21 and she was about 4 or 5, something about the maths there doesn't seem to add up, I suppose, and I think that's why he took interest in us. She was pulling at my hand in parts as well, so I guess without the context of what I was asked to do at the bus stop, I could be seen as suspicious looking. It didn't look like I was an older sibling either, nor her father. We really didn't look alike at all. Without giving too much away, I have slightly darker skin, and genetically I feel that her family might have been a little bigger than my family, and that's all I want to say. He was riding in the opposite direction, and I thought that he was just going to leave us alone. He'd just take a look and keep going, but when I heard the screech of bicycle brakes behind me, I knew he had turned around and come back. I then felt a tap on my shoulder and a voice asked, "Can I have a quick word with you?" I guess you can figure out what that means when an officer asks to have a talk with you. It's never great, is it? The little girl began to cry and wail again as we were both asked to go with the officer back to his station. The officer didn't seem that interested at all in how upset she was. It wasn't nice to know that the little girl was missing her violin lesson. She probably thought that she was going to be in a lot of trouble. We entered the local police station, and we were taken into a room at the back. I guess that they used that room for their interrogations. I was so flustered that I was doing a really terrible job of explaining the situation too. The officer took a look at my laptop bag and clocked my new company's name on it, and decided to pause our interview to contact them. I think he did this because maybe he didn't believe that I was an employee at that company. He might have thought that it was an accessory or something that I would use to make the child trust me. Had he asked me, I could have showed my ID. It's so frustrating thinking back on it. I told the officer my story and the little girl agreed with me. He wasn't buying it, and there was an awful lot of back and forth. I was really nervous because on top of all that was happening, I was now late for work at my new job. Ultimately, my innocence was proven by the violin teacher. She contacted the girl's mum, the lady I met at the bus stop, and she confirmed my story. After I was released, and I got to work, I was ordered to see the head of my department. I explained it all, and he was very sympathetic actually. I went home that night feeling exhausted and having mixed feelings about the day. I felt embarrassed, most of all. I went back to work the following morning, and over the course of a couple of days, rumors about me were being spread behind my back at work. I was famous as the newbie who got busted in a kidnapping attempt. These employees which were spreading these rumors were saying that I was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping a young girl. Because I was new, some of the employees who had been there for a long time felt comfortable enough to tease me. I tried to join in, to kind of laugh it off, so they knew it wasn't going to hurt me, but that ended up making me feel really uncomfortable. Every hour of the day, someone had a jibe at me. I began to resent the company I worked so hard to get into. They would joke at me as soon as I came into the room, behind cupped hands as I walked past, and they would leave nasty post-it notes on my computer at work. It was like as soon as some of the senior staff said something and started laughing at me, the junior members of staff used it as an opportunity to buddy up to their bosses by joining in, and they would take it further than the seniors in an attempt to be recognized. No one cared about how it was affecting me, and my confidence was shot, my self-esteem was on the floor, and I hated it. But do you know what I hated the most? I hated the way the female employees looked at me. They looked at me like I was some kind of predator or something. They wouldn't make eye contact with me, and kept their interactions with me as short as humanly possible. Honestly, those looks that they gave me, they made me feel so dirty and so ashamed. Co-workers that I had gotten along with well were now trying to avoid me, like I was carrying some kind of disease or something. I was innocent, and it was proven, yet I was still being treated like I was this evil kidnapper. I couldn't stand it. I tried to ride out the storm because I truly wanted a career at that company. But when all the jibes and the bullying didn't stop for close to 5 months, I decided that enough was enough. I threw in the towel and I quit. No one cared that I quit. They just made sure that they got in as many insults as they could before I worked my notice period. Now I guess this is the part where I tell you my thoughts after the fact, like a kind of afterword in a book or at the end of some novel. I believe that the mother I met that day is a decent person, but she did a bad thing. She had terrible judgment skills. I don't think she should be asking strangers to take her daughter on a bus ride. She actually reached out to me after getting my details from the police to make an apology, and that's why I think I can say she's learned her lesson on putting her daughter in strangers' hands. I hope she realizes that it could have been a lot worse if I was in fact the type of person that my co-workers were making me out to be. I also don't think a girl of her daughter's age should be riding the bus alone. I myself never rode the bus alone until I was about 10, and I know some parents who probably wouldn't be all that okay with that either. At the end of the day, the police's job is to investigate suspicious people. Had I been an actual kidnapper, then that officer would have been doing a great job by detaining me. I don't hate that he took us in for questioning because I want the streets to be safe. I wish that he didn't contact my company though. Now for my co-workers. I hate them for how they made me feel, and how they made me give up a career that I really wanted. They are the worst, and they knew that I was innocent, but they still continued. Things just went really off track that day. But would I do it again to help? Maybe. I'm not so sure now. I guess my confidence has been knocked and my faith in humanity shaken a little, but I must be a glutton for punishment. Because I don't think I can just stand by and ignore a request for help. Overall, I have mixed feelings, but I guess it's as they say, no good deed goes unpunished, right? I used to live in Nagoya, and this story takes place when I was an elementary school student. It was September, but it was still very hot out. But that day, heavy rain began to fall. I walked home after school with 2 friends who were in the same grade as me and lived close by. I remember that the sky was a solid grey colour. It was very dark. Whenever there was heavy rain forecast or bad weather coming like typhoons, I was always excited by the unusual feelings of, danger or anticipation that came over me. So that day, as I was heading home, I was messing around and making more noise than usual, playing around in the puddles in the rain. I lived in a relatively urban area in Nagoya. There were many hills, and there was an incline on the way I walked to school every day, which meant that there was a decline on my way home. So because of the hills, there was like these streams of water running down them. They were flowing very fast down towards the ditches and drains. It was amazing how the scenery had changed so dramatically to us elementary school students. I remember it being very interesting. The gutters at the side of the roads were clogged, and the gutters at the side of the roads were full of rushing water, but at points we would see the gutters and drains clogged up with leaves and other debris. I decided to lay a stick flat in the flowing water to see what would happen. And other times I poked at the leaves to create space for the water to drain. We were getting closer to our homes now, and I was thinking about how it had felt like a little adventure. That's when we discovered something. One of the drain covers were open, and we could see inside. We all gathered around and looked down. I was amazed by how fast the water was rushing down there. It was way faster than I could have imagined. The drain was huge. I guessed that it was some kind of storm drain. It looked like a water slide at the pool. I quickly threw a nearby stone down there and said, "Wow, this is amazing." It was really fun to see it get washed away in the blink of an eye. We played there for a while, chucking different things we found into the open drain mouth. Then someone said, "Try an umbrella." We were getting a little tired of throwing small things in there like sticks and stones and leaves, so we immediately went with this idea. We had all been using umbrellas that day, and I didn't want to get wet, so I didn't offer mine. I saw that one of my friends had begun to close his umbrella with a smile on his face. "I'll do it, but if I lose my umbrella, my mum will kill me. I'll just have to hold on to it." He aimed his umbrella into the drain, and almost instantly he yelped in panic. The force that the water was rushing almost swept him away. The umbrella opened up a little as soon as it hit the water, and the water rushed in and opened it more. And it quickly began to drag him down into the drain. We all grabbed at our friend. It was so scary, but I managed to grab his leg, and two of my other friends managed to get a hold of him too. Next, we heard a voice shouting from behind us. Before I turned around, I knew that the voice belonged to an adult, but I didn't expect to see our school's vice principal running over towards us. My friend, probably alerted to the sound of this voice, let go of his umbrella. The umbrella was swept away in a blink of an eye. We could all hear the sound of metal spines in the umbrella cracking and breaking in the drain. It sounded like bones breaking to me. The vice principal joined us at that moment, and he looked incredibly angry. He started yelling at us. He was saying things like, "You can't play here. It's too dangerous. Hurry up and get home." After being scolded by the vice principal, a man who we rarely interacted with, we scurried off home with our tails between our legs. When I got home, I told my mother about what had happened. For some reason, I was really excited to tell her. She looked annoyed and asked me, "Where did this happen?" And I said, "Down the hill, near our road." And it looked like that was the place where we had found the open storm drain. She looked angry and almost disgusted with me. She left the room, and I knew that I probably shouldn't talk to her about it again. My brother was in the same room as us, and he had just heard our conversation. I turned to him, and he started teasing me, saying about how much trouble I was going to be in. Classic older sibling. I asked him if he knew why Mum was so angry, and he told me the following. About 8 years ago, on a similar day like today, where heavy rain fell constantly, a schoolboy of about your age was walking home alone. He never made it home though. He vanished. parents and teachers were searching all over for him. All they found was his rucksack nearby a ditch. Several hours later, his body was discovered a few hundred meters from where his bag was found. He had somehow entered a storm drain, and he got washed away by the force of the rushing water. They say that his body was completely mangled and all of his bones were broken. The vice principal was the one who found him, so my brother wasn't surprised that he was yelling at us. Lots of people in our area had heard of the incident, actually, including my parents. Our house phone began to ring. It jumped me out of my skin, and my mother answered it in the other room. I found out later that the vice principal was calling to see if I had made it home. He was very worried about us because he said that he had seen us playing with the exact storm drain where the missing student's backpack was found next to. He said that he found it disturbing that the storm drain was open because since the accident, safety measures had been taken to make sure that it remained shut. I told my mum that we didn't open the storm drain, and it was open by the time we got there. If the vice principal hadn't come rushing over that day, then I don't know if my friend would have let go of his umbrella. I feel like he saved us from a terrible incident. My friend could have ended up like that poor boy who got sucked into the drain. Needless to say, when my dad got home, both of my parents gave me a very long lecture about the dangers of playing with a drain, and I vowed that I would never go near one again. I told my friends about the story my brother told me, and we agreed that we were glad that the vice principal was there for us and no one got hurt. There was one thing that has been left unanswered though. No one has owned up to being the one who said, "Try an umbrella," when we were messing around throwing things in the storm drain. I know that it wasn't me who said that, and my friends were adamant that it wasn't them. Who was it if all of us were telling the truth? Was it someone else? Is someone lying? Whenever it rains heavily, I cannot help but remember that phrase. It sounds almost ghostly in my mind. I wonder if the vice principal is still out there keeping an eye on children making their ways home. It was nice of him to be there to watch over us. This happened a few years ago, and it's taken me a while to feel like talking about it. This might be a slightly longer than usual story, but here I go. About 4 or 5 years ago, my friend and I, who were college students at the time, we decided to go to an all-girl college. There was a festival and we wanted to meet some women in our area. Seemed like a good idea at the time. We thought that it would be easy to meet some girls our age, but somehow we seemed to neglect the fact that we weren't all that interesting, or handsome, or even approachable. Well, it didn't really go to plan, but not all hope was lost. I knew that in some of the classrooms at this university there would be students selling snacks and drinks. That's how they made money for the festival, you see. So I thought that I could get some one-on-one time with whoever was selling that stuff. And my friend, of course. We walked the halls of their college and we were waving at the ladies, and man, some of them smiled my way. I even exchanged a number with a lady. She took some convincing, but she gave up her digits in the end. It was a pretty productive day, so my friend and I decided to head out. We were smiling as we were heading towards the entrance. But that smile was short-lived, as it looked like there was an increased security presence at the gates. We were both kind of shocked. I wondered if one of the girls we had waved at complained about us. I hope not. We weren't there to upset anyone. There were more teachers and security people than there had been in the morning. Well, rather than risk any kind of repercussion for our actions, we decided to slink out of the back of the school. I hoped that there might be some kind of unlocked gate back there that we could make a move through. But thinking back on it now, it wasn't the best idea at all. Although what we were doing wasn't exactly sweet, I doubt we would have been in all that much trouble for being there. It was a public event, anyone could go. All we had to do was walk out through the gate we came in through. But we didn't. We found a gate at the back of the college campus. The only thing was that it was locked. We decided to climb over it since we couldn't go through it. I felt for sure that we were going to be caught at that point. Somehow we made it out, and it seemed like we went undetected too. When we both climbed down from the gate, we came out into a residential area. It was a built-up area, suburbs. We knew that if we kept going in the direction that we were heading in, we would probably arrive back at the train station we hopped off at earlier. We walked on for a while, making small talk. We spoke about the girls we had minor exchanges with, and our overall impressions of the day, but after a while the small talk kinda dried up. Not because my friend and I ran out of things to talk about, but because something weird was going on. I realized that there were no people around. In a place that was so dense in homes, and with so many cars lining the streets, I found it incredibly hard to believe that we hadn't seen a single person as we walked along. It was weird. Not even a bus, taxi, car, or bike passed us by. It seemed like a very quiet area on a very, very quiet day. I guessed that it was so quiet because it was a Sunday. I looked over at my friend and I feel as if he was thinking the same thoughts as me. It looked like he had noticed how quiet it was there. We both continued walking, pretending that nothing was out of the ordinary. We walked for a few minutes and then I was suddenly struck by a sharp feeling of anxiety. I felt as if someone was looking at me. I felt it from behind. I'm not that great with intuition or anything like that, so I didn't know what my gut was trying to tell me. I took a quick look over at my friend again. I was hoping it was just me being paranoid, but when I caught eyes with him, I realized that he was feeling what I was feeling too, and we exchanged some nervous glances. He asked me, "Are you feeling like something's behind us?" "Yeah. I don't know, but maybe there is something following us. Don't look back." "I don't know, man. Maybe we should speed up a little, just in case." We started walking faster, and I noticed a couple of things about the area while we walked. The first thing I noticed was the residential area we were walking through was going on far too long. On our way to the college, it felt like it took half of the time we had been walking so far. The other thing was the fact that even though it felt like something, and I stress the word something, was behind us, I still felt it was strange that we hadn't seen a single person on the streets. The houses started to all look the same. It was very eerie. I looked up at one of the windows in one of the houses we passed by, and I saw something moving. When I saw something in that window, my first reaction was something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm glad there's people here." But when I focused on what was moving, I realized that something was wrong. I saw a pale hand waving at us. I looked at the next window, and there was another pale hand waving. I could see slightly more of the arm this time. I looked across the street, and through kitchen blinds, I saw pale hands waving at me and my friend. It got to a point where every window we passed had a pale hand waving. In different degrees of excitement and pace, some waved slowly, some waved erratically, and some seemed to wave suggestively. You could almost tell what the owners of those hands might look like just by the way they were moving. It was strangely enticing. We walked past a parked car on the other side of the road, and a hand was waving from the backseat window. It was so strange and unusual that it was downright disturbing, and I really, really didn't like it. I spoke sharply under my breath and asked my friend if he was seeing what I was seeing. He didn't answer, so I looked over at his face, and to me, in that moment, it looked like he was on the verge of tears. Behind him, I could see a blur of pale hands waving from windows. I asked him an important question. "Can you run?" I watched as he slowly nodded, his head up and down. He seemed scared to speak. Those waving hands were really scary, but so was the feeling of whatever was still behind us. It was still coming. I broke out into a jog, or maybe it was more like a sprint. Whatever it was, I started running, and so did my friend. I don't know how long we were running for, but my friend started to run out of gas a little. I was in the track and field club, and I wasn't a bad runner back then, but my friend was, I don't know how a nice way to say this is, but let's just say he was more of an indoors type of gentleman. He was clutching at his sides and complaining. I think he couldn't physically go on any further. He was wheezing and spluttering, kinda sounded like he was gonna hurl, too. He dropped to his knees and yelled, "Go on without me." It was like a line from an action film. It was honestly so weird that day. He yelled at me, "I'll catch up to you as soon as I can," and I don't know why, but I started running. Normally I wouldn't allow myself to leave anyone behind, especially under those circumstances, but I ran. I regret this choice. Maybe I should have at least attempted to carry him on my back, although saying that, I'm not sure how far the pair of us would have got. I felt guilty for leaving him behind, but I ran and I ran and I ran. I gradually realized that the more I ran, the less I felt like something was pursuing me. It felt as if the presence behind me had disappeared. Then I felt as if I was back in the real world. There was nothing behind me, and life just seemed to look a little bit more normal than it had been a few moments ago. I ended up in a public park, and I almost collapsed through exhaustion. There were people in the park, and that made me feel incredibly relieved. They all seemed concerned for me. In the park I was in, I heard the splashing of water. I don't know why, but I brought myself to my feet, and I went in search of that sound. I didn't have to go far though, because in the middle of this park was a lake, river or pond, I'm not sure which one, but it was a body of water. In that body of water, I saw my friend. The one who I had been with earlier. There was just no way in hell that he could be here after I had left him back there. I didn't really allow that thought to occupy too much of my brain space, because I was just so incredibly pleased to see him. I started yelling out his name at the top of my lungs, and I waded into the water to embrace him. I was so glad that he wasn't going to be left behind with all those pale, waving hands. My friend's face was expressionless though. As soon as I entered the water, he dove down and went for my legs. He took my legs out from under me, and I was submerged in the murky water. He was wrestling with me and twisting and turning with me under the water. I don't know what had gotten into him, but it was like he was trying to drown me or something. I kicked him away, and he fell on his back. And then he came out of the water with his arms raised, outright poised to choke me. In the end, some bystanders, I guess, separated us, and we found ourselves in the backs of police cars. I don't know what the hell happened to us that day, but I have a feeling that we were somehow spiked at that all-girls college. If we didn't go out the entrance, then maybe our night could have ended a lot more differently than a wrestle in a pond in a park. All those weird things we saw, those feelings of paranoia. It was also terrifying, so real, and oh man, I can still see those waving hands in my mind. I don't even look at the windows in buildings as I pass them anymore, for fear of seeing a pale hand waving back at me. Whatever that place was, I really don't want to go back there. I have no idea what it all meant, or if it's supposed to mean anything at all, but all I can say is, I'm glad that my friend and I got out of wherever we were, or whatever minor trip we were on. This next experience takes us to Iwate Prefecture and was submitted by a woman in her 50s in August of 2020, but it takes place years beforehand. This happened when I was in my 20s. I used to work at a nursery school in Iwate Prefecture. It was kind of like a daycare, really. We looked after children until their parents came to collect them after work. The latest the children left would be about 7:30, and then us staff members would clean down and get everything ready for the next day. On the night that this experience took place, all us staff members were called into work for a team meeting after the students left for the day. We gathered together in one of the little nursery rooms. After sharing some information and discussions on students and upcoming events, we began to get ready to leave for the night. But a sudden noise stopped us. We heard the sound of footsteps running down the hallway. It clearly sounded like a child was running. We were all so shocked to hear that because it was only supposed to be us employees here at that time of night. Everyone in the room went quiet. We all stood there listening and exchanging glances of disbelief. I thought, oh, maybe one of the children hadn't been picked up and perhaps one of them had been hiding from us. But it just seemed too impossible though. No parent had ever been this late to pick up their child. It just didn't happen. Plus, how could one of us not realize that a child hadn't been picked up or even failed to find a hiding child in our very small daycare? Before I could think of what to do next, I heard those footsteps running back in the opposite direction. This time there was another noise. We had bags hanging from pegs out in the hallway. They were changing bags for some of the children. It sounded like someone had smacked each bag with their hand as they ran past. I knew that sound well. We discouraged children from doing that. I can't tell you how many times a day I said to the kids, don't hit those bags, they'll fall down. Plus, it was super annoying if you were in the middle of a class and you heard that sound. Really jarring. This all happened very quickly, by the way. We didn't have a chance to say anything to each other whilst we stood in silence in our room. We were sure that the entrance door was locked and all the children had gone home. And then a few more seconds of silence passed, and I heard one of my co-workers ask, "What's this? A ghost?" We all looked at one another in shock again. We really didn't know what to think. Since these were everyday noises that we were hearing, we weren't really scared of what was happening. I heard myself say, "It's not one of my students." There was no basis for me saying that, but judging the situation solely on the sounds I had just heard, I felt very strongly that it wasn't one of my students. Something just felt different. Back then we had a co-worker who claimed to have a strong sense of spiritual understanding. She said that she had the ability to sense the presence of ghosts. She was the first to open the door and go investigate. Our daycare was dark and silent. The classrooms were still, and the whole place seemed to have taken on a new atmosphere since the moment we heard those little footsteps running up and down the hall. There was no one in the hallway. There was no one but us in the school that night, and we knew that deep down. No child was playing pranks. We were experiencing something, perhaps, otherworldly. But the woman who claimed to be able to interact with spirits said that she heard a faint, childlike voice whisper, "Let's play." We stayed silent, straining our ears, trying to figure out what on earth was happening, and to test if we could hear anything. I swear, I heard a little voice giggle coming from right in front of me, a bodiless voice in the quiet of the night. The spiritual woman then said she felt sorry for the presence that was with us in the daycare that night. She said that he had met with sad circumstances. "You can't stay here. You have somewhere else to go, don't you?" she said out loud. Since the moment she said those words, nothing further happened. No phantom footsteps or bodiless voices. We were all unsure of what we experienced that night, but those footsteps we heard, were they the footsteps of a wandering spirit? A child, perhaps? If one person said that they heard it and told me about it, I think I would be ready to argue that they might have been hearing things or just imagining things, you know? If you work with kids all day, the noises that they make can stay with you after hours, believe me. But we all experienced it, so I don't think any of us can say that we were hearing things that night or imagining it. The spiritual co-worker of mine said at a later date the following: "Perhaps some unfortunate child who passed over came to our daycare in the hope to play with someone his age." And I gotta say, that hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt something closer to pity rather than fear after she said that. I prayed for that little boy. I don't care even if there is a logical explanation, because I just can't seem to find it. I hope that that little one isn't wandering around alone anymore. And I hope his soul is at rest. Or better still, I hope he's up there with more playmates than he knows what to do with. A long time ago, I had a job at my local convenience store. It was only a part-time gig, and I was grateful of the money it brought in since I was new to work at that age. One thing that I wasn't keen on was the fact that I worked the night shift. It wasn't my first job, and don't think that I was too young, because I wasn't. I was old enough. I think I was about 21, and I'm a guy, if that matters at all. This incident happened one night during one of the colder months, when I was cleaning. It was after 3 a.m. I know that because that was the time I had to empty out the Oden containers and clean them. These containers were usually pretty oily by the time you had to empty them out, so you had to, put some elbow grease into cleaning them. It wasn't a 5-minute job. I knew I would be in the back of the store for a little while. The convenience store policy was to wash these when it was quiet, which was about 3 a.m. for me. So I was in the back carefully washing these containers, careful not to splash myself with any of that stinky oil, to be honest. I thought that I heard someone come into the store, so naturally, I shouted out, "Welcome." I turned to face the door. I was facing the sink at the time, and I was kind of surprised to see that there was no one there. I didn't overthink it because, these things happen. I just put it down to the fact that I must have been half asleep or something. So I went back to washing up the containers. I kept scrubbing for a while, but then I noticed something from the corner of my eye. I looked up through this window we had in the back, and I saw a woman with long black hair stood by the magazine rack. I guess that someone did come in then. I was aware of her, and I would react should she approach the counter, but more often than not, people who head right for the magazine rack are there to browse for a while. Well, in my experience at least. I finished cleaning the Oden trays, and I set them out to dry. I figured that I might as well put some water in the kettle if she wanted to have a cup of ramen or something else. I hung out in the back, busying myself as much as I could, but she didn't show any signs of coming to the register. I stuck my head out from the back, and I looked for the black-haired customer who entered my store, but I came up empty. There was no one in the store but me, it seemed. Okay, this was weird. I decided that it would be a good idea to look for her, just to make sure she hadn't collapsed or something worse. I went up and down the aisles, but she was nowhere to be seen. I even gave the ladies' door a knock before opening it. It was showing as vacant, and opening the door proved that it was vacant. I thought, okay, whatever, and I started back towards the register. I must have been more tired than I realized. As I looked up, I saw the woman with the black hair stood in the back just behind the window I saw her from earlier. I froze. I had just done a sweep of the store. I had checked all the places that she could have been, and for her to be back there without me knowing seemed an absolute impossibility. I panicked. It was impossible. That word just kept going back to me. I ran to the first safe place I could think of, which was our warehouse store area. It was good that I did that because in our storage area, there are these surveillance cameras which covers all angles of the store. I stared at the 4 camera angle feeds for the longest time, but I couldn't see where that woman went. I knew that I had seen a woman in that store, though. I couldn't trick myself into doubting what my eyes had seen. I couldn't do anything about the situation I was in, and the eyes I believed had seen that woman were now telling me that the store was empty. So I timidly returned to the store. I still had a job to do. I wasn't going back there empty-handed though. I carried a mop with me. Yeah, it's lame, and I didn't want to use it as a weapon. I had no intention of hurting anyone that night. I just didn't want to be without something. If it was just a customer, and I was just overreacting, then I was just going to have a perfectly friendly mop-up in the store. I made it back to the cash register. It was somewhat comforting to have the barrier of the counter between me and whatever might be here. I realized quite quickly that I needed to occupy my mind, so I began to count the bills in the register, and when I got bored of that, I went over to the magazine corner. I decided to borrow a magazine of my own, a men's magazine. I was 21, come on. Reading that made me feel a little better about what was happening. I calmed myself a little. I was engrossed in my gentleman's reading, but then I heard a truck approaching. It was the garbage truck, so I quickly went out to the back to grab all the rubbish we had, and then I returned to the front of the store. For the second time that night, I froze in place. I saw someone's feet in front of me. They were head height. I couldn't help but stare at these feet that seemed to be suspended in the air, right before my eyes. The ankles were facing me. I slowly looked upwards. The dangling feet belonged to a woman with long black hair. She was softly swaying, left to right. She had something around her neck that extended to the ceiling. In a matter of nanoseconds, I understood the situation. I saw a woman suspended from a rope by her neck. My eyes showed me her pale face, and hers gave me a bloodshot glare. She wasn't there. She couldn't be there, yet she was there. Feeling as if my work had turned into a haunted house, I ran for it. I guess I ran out screaming because I only stopped screaming when I was aware of the fact that I was screaming. Worse than the screaming was the fact that I couldn't control my arms. They were just uncontrollably shaking. I couldn't pull my phone out of my pocket at first, but when I did, I made what I knew would be a very embarrassing call to the police. I was out of options. I knew that what I was about to tell them would be strange, but I didn't know what to do. After a while, a couple of officers arrived, and I spoke with them outside because I wasn't going back in there alone. They initially had looks of concern on their faces, but when I explained the situation, I saw their expressions change. They went into the store and looked over the place while I waited outside, pacing up and down, peering in when I thought that they weren't looking my way. The 2 officers had a conversation in my store that I couldn't hear, and then one of them came back outside to speak to me. "Hey kid, are you sure you didn't imagine it? Maybe working alone reminded you of a horror film or something like that?" He then gave me a smile and said, "Yeah, that's it, isn't it?" It was as if saying that was the kind of case closed moment for them. To be honest, I didn't argue. I didn't think that they would ever see what I saw, and I didn't like the way they spoke to me, so I was glad to see the back of them. When they left, I didn't mind at all, but I made sure I stood by the door for the remainder of my shift. If anything else weird was going to happen, I was going to make sure that I was out of that door as soon as possible. I got through the night, and when I saw my manager next, I told him that I didn't want to work the night shift anymore. Thankfully, I got a switch to an earlier shift, and that was my last night shift in that convenience store. I couldn't ever do it again after seeing what I saw. Just the thought of seeing that woman suspended in the middle of the store gives me the chills. I dreaded work, but I needed the money. My town wasn't known for the opportunities that it gave our youth. I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw, and I eventually realized that I wanted to find out more. I looked into the building's history, and when that came back with nothing, I looked into what other buildings were built on that plot of land. It wasn't long before I discovered that a block of apartments stood here before the convenience store did. I looked up the address on Oshimateru, and I found something. There was an incident of someone taking their own life in this building. Hi, Jay here. I've covered this one before. Oshimateru is a website that essentially gives you a map of previous incidents that have occurred in areas. Japanese people use it to see if a place is haunted or to find out reasons why a place gives off a bad vibe, for example. If you want to know more about this, I go into a bit more depth in another video that I will link in the description. It's my accident property video. Anyway, back to the story. Did I see something that night? Did I see a woman who ended it all? I don't know, but I know I saw something. There were times after that night, even on the morning shift, that I thought I caught a glimpse of that woman through the window when I was in the back. I had to leave that job. I'm glad I did, but I'm just worried that I'll see that woman again someday. I hope her spirit can find peace and rest before I ever see her again. I grew up in the era that people dared one another. Bragging rights were really big back in the day. My school friends and I used to dare each other to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And for some reason, we ended up daring each other to go to a nearby shrine in the middle of the night. I mean, a quiet and secluded place in the middle of the night is scary enough, right? And of course, shrines have that kind of vibe to them at night. But if you couple those things with the fact that the shrine backed onto a mountain and there was nothing but dense tree lines and thick forest behind it, it makes it even worse. We had no idea what could be in those woods. To us younger people, the area behind the shrine was like a forest that man had yet to draw maps of. It felt like an undiscovered location. So for my friends and I to be out there by the shrine in the middle of the night doing dares was something, you know? It wasn't like Ding Dong Ditch or Knock Knock Ginger. This was a couple levels higher than that. So that night we snuck out when we thought our parents would be sleeping, and we headed out into the woods towards the shrine. It felt like it was an eerie kind of night. There was a whiff of Halloween in the air, you know? I guess that doesn't make all that much sense, but that's how I remember it. It was a summer night, by the way. That's why it was strange to smell something so October about the air. A coldness to the night air, and a scent of dead leaves perhaps? I don't know. Anyway, as you get closer to the shrine, you see a massive torii gate. And just inside of that towering red wooden gate are some very old and very large stone steps. It is a really long trek from the bottom of the steps to the top of the shrine, and because we had all snuck out in the middle of the night and there was no one around, each step we took towards the darkness was creepier than the last. About halfway up to the shrine, on those stone steps, we all stopped because we could hear something. It was honestly like some kind of nightmare was being manifested in those moments. We honestly thought that we would be alone out there that late. We heard a tumbling sound coming from the darkness further up the stone steps. It sounded like something light that was moving quite quick. We all froze as the sound slowed down, and then the object that had been tumbling down the steps arrived at our collective feet. One of my friends shone his flashlight towards the direction the sound stopped at. His torchlight revealed a single child's shoe laying on one of the mossy-covered stone steps. We stayed still like statues, and we remained silent. I can't speak for the others, but I was terrified. I didn't know why this shoe suddenly tumbled down the steps. I mean, we were kids, but this shoe, it was like a little toddler's shoe. I was pretty sure that a toddler wouldn't be up in the mountain at that time of night, not even with their parents. Once those logical questions had been somewhat answered, I just couldn't stop thinking about what might be up those stone steps near the shrine waiting for us. Was something watching us? Was someone up there, or something? And then I couldn't get that particular thought out of my mind. I couldn't shake the idea that something was up there. Something was up there in the darkness, and I could just sense it, like the way you feel something like thirst or hunger. No one taught you that feeling. It's just something you're born with, something innate. I turned and started quick walking back down the steps, even though no words were exchanged between my friends who were all on the same page. They quickly followed me down the stone steps, and that was the first and last time we went exploring at the shrine that late at night. Some weird things go on in the woods at night, and I want no part of them. This happened about 7 years ago when I went to Disneyland, and I stayed in a hotel that might be affiliated with Disneyland. If I remember correctly, it's called the Tokyo Hotel. Anyways, I stayed there for 3 nights in a pretty big family room. I think that hotel room is haunted, and even a person who's not a believer could have their mind changed if they stayed in the same room that I did. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to find out if anyone on here has had an experience in that hotel. I was staying in the hotel with my husband and my 2 children. We had taken a flight to Disneyland as a treat for the children. I noticed something pretty strange about the hotel. The door to this walk-in wardrobe would open by itself, and no matter how many times I closed it, it would just keep on opening. But that's not that strange, right? Maybe there was an issue with the hinge or the latch that prevented the door from staying shut. Well, this door felt a little different because whenever I was looking at it, it would stay shut, but the second I left the room, it would open by itself. By the time I noticed this was happening, I was in bed, and my husband and children were sleeping soundly in the room with me. They hadn't woken up yet. I knew something was kind of wrong, but I didn't want to scare my children. But when my husband woke up that morning, I thought about telling him about the door. The first thing he said to me when he woke up was, "Hey, last night when I was in the shower, someone knocked on the shower door. Was that you? Some kind of prank? Also, last night someone took away the hotel slippers I was using. I can't find them anywhere. Was that you too?" I told him that it wasn't me. I didn't think it was the kids. I then told him about the door, and he agreed that the hotel was giving off strange vibes. We both agreed that we didn't think we were alone in that hotel room, but we didn't particularly feel frightened by what was going on. We kind of joked that if there was a spirit in that hotel room, it was likely the spirit of a mischievous child. We decided to keep it from the kids and just enjoy our vacation. My husband had never been a believer, so it was unusual to hear him talking about ghosts and the paranormal. We went down to enjoy the hotel buffet in the morning, and naturally as we left our room, I hung the little sign around the doorknob that said, "Do not disturb." We were going to eat and then come back and then go out for the day. When we came back from breakfast, as expected, the door to the walk-in wardrobe was wide open again. And not only that, but the towels from the bathroom had been flung all over the room. I turned to my husband and said, "Hey, maybe we should change rooms?" My husband then replied with something like, "Well, if they let us change, usually we need a good reason. I don't know if this is something they'll accept." He called the front desk and asked for a room change. While they did say that this would be possible, the only thing they could offer for us was 2 twin rooms on different floors. That wasn't really great with 2 little ones. I thought about it and I realized that I didn't want 2 separate rooms. It would make the trip a bit weird, plus it would be difficult to explain to the kids why they would be sleeping in different rooms. It seemed like it would be a bit of a headache, so we decided to keep our family room to maintain the status quo. We should have changed rooms because little did I know another incident would happen that night. My kids showered after the day at Disneyland, and then I did. We were all so tired, we just took a rest on the bed. I was so sleepy that I fell asleep next to my daughter. She was 9 years old at the time. After a few hours, I woke to the sound of crying. My daughter was sat up in the bed crying next to me. I panicked a little and quickly asked her what was the matter. She didn't say anything, so I asked her if she had a bad dream. To this, she shook her head and pointed at the side of the bed near the wall. She said through tear-filled eyes that there was a little girl there, and the little girl was crying because her mother is gone. My husband woke up around that point. He came over to comfort her. I hadn't heard my daughter cry like that before. She was really shaken up. It didn't sound like she was making it up. She was certain about what she had seen. Mum, I hope the girl can find her. Her mum is probably still at the park. I asked her if she wanted to sleep in the bed with Daddy, and she did, and she didn't wake up again that night. I didn't go back to sleep so quickly. I lay there in the silence, wide awake. After a while, I heard something. It was faint, but it was definitely the sound of crying. I looked over at my husband, who just nodded at me to indicate he could hear it too. It was so scary. It was just like my daughter said. A little girl was crying, and it sounded like it was coming from the same room as us. Then, suddenly, I felt hot tears well in my eyes. It was like I was feeling what that child was feeling. I cannot explain it. I've heard that sometimes possessions are like that, so I guess it could have been a possession. It was truly an unforgettable experience for me. I felt like talking to this child. Before I could even question how strange that was, I heard myself speaking out loud, but it wasn't my voice. It wasn't my words, it was someone else's. I said something like this: "Mommy, I can't find you. I'm lonely. I'm sure you're looking for me. I wish you would come and find me. Didn't you have fun at the park with me?" I felt something strange then happen. It was like I was allowed back control of my voice, so I tried to respond to the poor little girl. "I'm sure your mother is looking for you. I know you are so lonely. I hope she'll find you. I know she will. I hope you had a fun time at the park with your mum." I then fell asleep. It was as if some kind of weight had been lifted from me. I woke up in the morning and noticed that my husband and daughters were sleeping in the same bed that I was. I found out later that apparently I had been speaking a lot in my sleep, so they came to be near me in the hope that it would calm me down. Later that morning, we would check out of the room, and I'm not scared of what happened that night. I don't know how I could be. I just have this profound feeling of sadness about the whole thing. Sometimes I wonder if a child is still in that room, if she's still crying. My husband and I speak about it all the time. Maybe someone else has had an experience there, because I don't want it to become some big thing, and I feel like some people would misuse that information and might even give the hotel negative reviews or upset that spirit more than it is already. So has anybody heard anything about that hotel? I read something online. Apparently a family with some serious debt issues took their lives there as part of a family suicide in that room. The child of the family passed on in the room, I won't say how, while the parents left this world through the hotel window. It's so sad, isn't it? I feel like the family wanted to give their daughter a fun final day before they made their wicked choice. Of course, this could be unrelated, but I guess not all hauntings are scary. This happened a long time ago, roughly 22 or 23 years ago. I've recently found these message boards, and I enjoy reading about your creepy experiences, so I've decided to share mine. I was a single man at the time this happened, and I loved going on long drives, roughly once a month. It was mid-autumn, and I decided to go for a drive after work. I headed to a spot I liked a lot at the time. I worked a job that allowed me to finish early on Fridays if I made up enough hours throughout the week. Well, usually I would have finished earlier, but there was a deadline I needed to work to, so I had to stay later than expected. I'm quite a stubborn person, and I was looking forward to my monthly drive, so I was going to go on my monthly drive. Just because I was heading off later than I expected didn't mean that it wouldn't be fun. My destination was a convenience store which was about 2.5 hours away. The roads were really nice, and there were some winding roads and highways which allowed me to get up some speed. I arrived at the convenience store, and I parked in one of the corner spots. That store was a little unusual because it had a large number of parking bays. I think that convenience store owner bought the piece of land that it sits on, and previously that piece of land probably belonged to a hotel or something like that. Well, that's my guess anyway. So I liked using that store as my marker to head back. I would park up, get a drink, some snacks, or even take a quick nap. Well, since it was autumn and it was night out, I thought I would take a nap until the sun came up. I kept a sleeping bag in my car for situations just like that. I locked my doors and my windows. I was a lot more tired than I thought, so it didn't take me long to get to sleep. But before I went to sleep, I reclined my seat, and then I drifted in to a dreamless sleep. I was suddenly jolted awake when I felt a pair of hands grab my shoulders from behind and attempt to pull me backwards. I immediately thought, this cannot be possible. I locked the doors and I'm alone in the car. What the heck is happening? I was in a state of absolute confusion and shock. In the chaos of me flapping and pulling forward, I heard something that still gives me chills to this day when I think back to it. It's 23 years on and I still can't get it out of my head. I heard a woman laugh despite being alone in the car. And that laughter slowly decreased in volume until it completely faded out. I looked in my rear view mirror and I didn't see anyone behind me. I knew that I wouldn't because I knew I was alone. I got out of the car in a panic, and I stood by the side of it taking deep breaths. I was shaking with fear. I had no explanation for what had just happened. I had a flashlight in my car, so I grabbed that. I wanted to be in the light. I was shining it around the parking lot, hoping to see something. Some sense of something normal to take my mind off what had happened. My flashlight's light fell on an old, tattered poster, which had been tied to the chain link fence. And it read something like this: information needed. Body of foreign national female found inside suitcase. Suspect and victim unidentified. My heart sank. I thought that the hands I felt and the laughter I had heard might have belonged to the woman, if this was her unfortunate final resting place. One thing I will say is that the woman who grabbed me did not feel like she did it out of anger or hatred. I know how crazy I must sound right now, but stay with me for a second. She grabbed me in such a way that I felt like she was teasing me, like a big sister would. That being said, it was still scary as hell, and I was a nervous wreck at the time. I didn't want to get back on the road because I was so tired. I regretted going on a drive so late. I was so annoyed at myself. I went to the convenience store, bought a bottle of tea, used the bathroom, and went back to my car. With little other options available, I did the following. I poured a little of my tea out by the car and said, "Please, can you let me sleep a little while longer?" And then I got back into my car and tried to get some more rest. Amazingly, I fell asleep without much issue, and I didn't wake up again until morning came. I guess she let me sleep through the night. I have mixed feelings about that night. It was scary, but it was kind of a nice memory. This happened when I was in elementary school, but I'll never forget it. I grew up on the outskirts of Tokyo in the suburbs. It wasn't the nicest of places. It was in an apartment block, but I guess that was what we could afford at the time. The building was old and a little unsafe, but it was home. In fact, the first floor was a restaurant, a Chinese place, and it didn't have a good reputation. I heard the adults in and around my family speaking about that place from time to time. They never had anything nice to say about it. They said it was dirty, and to be honest, it looked dirty. That wasn't the problem though. The restaurant owner's son was the problem. We were about the same age. We were both elementary school student age. He didn't go to my school. I'm not even sure he did go to school, come to think of it. I never saw him wearing any school uniforms. He seemed to be wearing the same tattered t-shirt and bottoms I saw him in each day. I saw him pick on kids in the area as well, some kids who had learning challenges, and that really wasn't right. I saw him chasing a cat around with a stick trying to club it. I just had the lowest opinion of that kid and I really disliked him. I'll go further. I hated him. He made me feel really uncomfortable. And if you don't hate him by now, let me share something extra. One afternoon after school, I was playing with a couple of my friends near our building. There were 4 of us in total. Suddenly, the restaurant kid wanders over with his stick. I don't realize that he's coming at the time. I knew he was there when I felt my skirt being lifted. I spun around in shock and my friends gasped. I came face to face with that restaurant kid and I shouted at him. I said something like, "What do you think you're doing?" And he looked me in the eyes, not ashamed that he had been caught doing something that he shouldn't have been doing. No, annoyance didn't come into it. He was irritated. He was angry that I had reacted in the way that I had, and he made this kind of tss noise. You know the one, right? It's like a tut, like that kind of thing. I didn't wait for him to say anything other than that. I just kicked my right foot back at him as hard as I could, and he fell onto the ground with a thud and groaned in pain. He looked up at me, and I expected him to lash out, but he grinned. Man, that grin was scary. I knew at that moment that I had to avoid that kid at all costs. When I was out playing with my friends, if I ever saw that restaurant kid, I would do my best to avoid him. We would end up hanging out in areas far away from my home, just on the off chance that we would run into him. But then he started showing up in other places. He always seemed to find my little group, and of course, whenever we saw him, we would flock like pigeons. We didn't want to be anywhere near him. Sometimes he would turn up without us knowing, and then he tried to mess with us, usually when we were in the park. Every kid wanted to be in the park during the summer, and even if he was there, I didn't want him to ruin the park for me and my friends. He kind of backed off after a while though, and seemed content to do his own thing away from us. So we didn't end up moving away from playing in the park. He didn't bother us and we didn't bother him. We were kind of grateful that he had something else to occupy his time with, rather than terrorizing us. We still loved playing on the slide. It wasn't just a slide. No, it was a really big slide that you could go through tunnels and you could get quite a bit of speed up. It was great, and also it was in the shape of a whale. So, as we arrived, we climbed the stairs to the slide and we noticed that there was 4 bottles of juice at the top. Underneath the bottles was a note on a slice of paper, and it read, "Free, please take," in bad handwriting. One of my friends started yelling and celebrating, saying stuff like, "Woo, we got something for free." I was more cautious. I told them they better be careful, because my parents always told me not to pick stuff up from the ground, And this kind of felt like one of those things, you know? So I didn't want any part of it. I didn't want that drink. My friend, I guess we're going to have to give her a name at this point. Alice will do. Alice said something like, "What are you worried about? This is for us." And she picked up a bottle of juice. Two of my other friends joined her, and then all of a sudden I felt like a stick in the mud for not joining in. They each grabbed a bottle, and they called out saying, "Hey, you sure you don't want any?" And stuff like that. Alice then looked at me like she was annoyed that I wasn't going to join in, as she unscrewed the cap of her bottle. She was the first to start drinking the juice. She really threw her head back and gulped it down. She lasted about 3 gulps before it happened. And then she just leans forward and starts spitting all the juice out. Well, more like throwing it up is more accurate. It was projectile vomiting, like from The Exorcist. Then she started coughing heavily, and we were all saying, "Hey, that's what you get for chugging it." You know, trying our best to laugh it off, but there was one problem. She didn't stop coughing. We all stared at her, collectively thinking, "Hey, that's a lot of coughing. When's this gonna end?" I then broke the silence. I asked her, "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. She just kept coughing and spluttering. It was no longer a laughing matter. She was spitting, and I watched her spit land on the ground, and it looked brownish. I looked at her, and this foamy brown spittle was trailing from the corners of her mouth. Something was very wrong. We all started screaming. Panic came at us thick and fast. We were all shouting for Alice's attention, each one of us wanting her to tell us that she was fine. Alice looked up at us, and she clutched her chest, and this was the last time we heard her speak, and she said, "Hot, hot, Mum," while she thrashed around. I'll never forget those words. An older woman who had seen us all crying and wailing came rushing over. She was asking us what we did, and the only thing we could tell her was that Alice drank the juice that we had found atop of the slide. As we panically explained this to the older woman, we saw a look of horror cross over her face. She dug her flip phone out of her purse, and she called for an ambulance. Us young girls couldn't do anything other than freak out. Yet amidst all this frightening turmoil, I felt as if I should turn in the opposite direction of Alice, as if someone was looking my way, and I had to look back. It was like an itch that needed to be scratched. I turned to meet the eyes of the restaurant kid. He was crouching behind some plants in the park. It was summer and the grass was higher than usual. The restaurant kid was squatting down and watching our panic. He was smiling. He was so pleased with himself. My other 2 friends, and obviously Alice as well, didn't notice him, but I sure did. As soon as he noticed that I had spotted him, he ran for it. Moments later, an ambulance arrived for Alice. My parents and the paramedics asked me very serious questions that I couldn't quite answer. It was all a blur after that. I was so scared for my friend. I thought when she left in that ambulance that it might be the last time I ever saw her. Fortunately, it wasn't. She managed to make a recovery. She was even back in school after a week or 2. It was later discovered that the juice that she had drank hadn't been entirely juice. It was laced with pesticides. No one knew who had put those bottles on the slide. I heard phrases like random and no motive used a lot. In the end, they never caught the person who had left the pesticide juice mix on top of the slide. But I knew who did it. I just couldn't prove it. I was a kid and I didn't know what I could do about it. I was just really glad that Alice was back at school and she was safe. I guess you could say I was a little scared to put forward my theory for the culprit. I was scared if I told anyone he would try to hurt me or my friends again. We all got a lecture on how we shouldn't touch stuff that isn't ours or receive gifts from strangers at school after that. A few months after all this went down, the restaurant on the bottom floor of our building went out of business or moved on. I don't really know. It became a convenience store, and I think that no one missed that restaurant or that family, in all honesty. I have no idea where that kid went. I just know that he probably didn't stop there. He might be out there doing worse things than poisoning little girls at the park. I hate him. This happened when I started living alone for the first time. I was as excited as I was nervous, I think. It's always hard when you start out on your own, right? I was looking for a place where the rent would be cheap, somewhere not too far from the station, and somewhere relatively new. I didn't know at the time, because I was young and naive, that the strict requirements that I wanted to be met were pretty difficult. I was advised by a letting agent that if I wanted to rent somewhere in my price range, then I could only do that if I gave up at least one of the conditions that I wanted. I reluctantly agreed and decided to view flats in buildings which were at least 10 years old. I wasn't really ecstatic when I went with the agent to view the first place she suggested, but I have to say, when I got there and she opened up the door, I was pleasantly surprised. It was nothing like I imagined it would be. I expected someplace half dilapidated. Again, excuse my naivety at the time, but I found the flat that I was being shown surprisingly beautiful. There was one thing that struck me almost instantly about the place, though. It gave off kind of a weird smell. It was like walking into a place that had been sealed shut for a while. It felt almost damp and lifeless. I got the vibe that no one had lived there for a long while. I looked over the place and I felt my smile widening as I mentally checked off all the things that I wanted in my new home. When I heard the price, I could barely contain my excitement. I don't know if it was the saleswoman or my own impulsivity, but I felt if I didn't act quickly, I would lose this place. It had big windows that allowed the sun in, it had a great storage system, and deep walk-in wardrobes, so it was perfect. I couldn't risk losing this place, so I decided to contract with the letting agency and lock it in. I moved in and I was so excited to start my new life. The big windows allowed so much sunshine in throughout the day, it was truly gorgeous. But at night time, I couldn't help but feel a little spooked out and therefore jumpy. I put it down to nerves, new home jitters. I just took a drink in the evening to calm my nerves, and then I was able to get off to sleep without any issue. But that restless and jittery sensation wouldn't let up no matter how many nights passed. I mean, initially I thought it was down to my caffeine intake, so I cut that back, but that didn't make any difference. It just made the next working morning even harder because I was used to the drink to get me to sleep. One night, I was doing my usual routine, and I found myself drifting off to sleep only to wake up at some point in the night to hear a noise coming from somewhere in my new home. What the hell is this? I thought, probably out loud. I tried to get up or twist my neck to face the direction of the sound, but I found that I was completely incapable of movement. I was like a slab of stone in my bed, motionless. I was suffering from sleep paralysis. I had experienced something like that before, so I didn't panic as much as I probably should have. I just relied on darting my eyes all over to try and find out what was happening. I judged that the noises I was hearing was coming from within the bathroom. The noise slowly sounded more familiar the more awake I became. To me, it sounded like water dripping. Did I forget to turn the shower off, or the tap? I wondered. I knew that was unlike me. I have never been a careless person, and I believe in a neat and tidy home, so I don't think I would have forgotten to turn off the tap or the shower. But I know we're all human and mistakes can happen. Just in case it was my carelessness, I tried to rise from my bed once again. I was struggling with whatever was keeping me on my bed when I heard something strange. The sound of water dripping, the sound that I had heard so clearly coming from the bathroom, seemed now to be approaching. It sounded like the dripping water was getting closer. I felt as if there was something in my home with me. I knew that I wasn't alone. There was something in my home and it was getting closer and closer to me. At that point, I still couldn't move. I felt as if my heart was pounding faster and faster every time I heard a droplet of water hit the floor. I couldn't even turn away from what was coming. I knew that I didn't want to see whatever it was, so the only thing I could do was shut my eyes. I screwed them as tightly shut as I could, and I pleaded to all the known deities to come and save me in my time of need. Nothing came to save me. Nothing seemed to be able to stop the inevitable. Before the presence I felt in the room with me approached me, I somehow managed to summon the courage to open my eyes. I guess I had a morbid sense of curiosity wash over me. I saw this black mass moving towards me, some kind of hulking, dark, pitch-black shadow. It loomed over me, and I shut my eyes and braced. But then before I knew it, it was morning. I was incredibly relieved to see that there was light in the room now, and I could feel the sensation of movement in my body once again. I got up and made my way to the bathroom. I had to know if what happened last night was the result of an overactive imagination or a tap left running. I wanted to know if what I experienced was dream or reality. The shower hadn't been dripping, and neither had the tap. I smiled to myself, thinking I'd better stop the boozing or get more sleep, because something clearly ain't right. I turned to go back into my bedroom, and then I stepped in something wet. I looked down and saw wet footprints leading all the way up to the side of my bed, where just by my bedside table, the water footprints had formed a kind of pool. It was as if there were footprints leading from the bathroom to my side of the bed, and something stayed there. It was a truly chilling sight. I didn't feel like being alone in my flat that night, and I was quite a long way from home, so I decided to call a friend of mine who lived in my area and ask if he wanted to spend the night. Now, this friend of mine was what you might call the spiritual type. He was all about the occult and communicating with spirits and stuff like that. I invited him and he took a look in my bathroom and said, "Something happened in here." He refused to stay the night and insisted that I stay with him at his place. I didn't tell him about the watermarks I had seen in the shape of footprints I had seen on the floor in the morning. I don't know how he could have known the bathroom was giving me bad vibes unless it was a heck of a guess. I decided to crash at his house. I went to the letting agent and explained the situation on my next available day off. It was at that point that they admitted to renting me an accident property, a home with a history, so to speak. I didn't know it well at the time, but apparently the rule is if you're going to sell someone a home, you have to explain what went on in that home before they sign the dotted line. I never got that explanation, so through this crazy loophole, I was able to back out of living at that place without losing my deposit. If you're wondering what happened in there, sorry, I was too much of a chicken to ask. I mean, I would be shocked if something didn't happen in the bathroom. One of the reasons I fell in love with the place was because it had a beautiful deep and wide bathtub, deeper than the usual standard for sure. I dread to think what might have happened in there. I don't have any, medium abilities. I don't like ghosts or anything scary for that matter. But I've always been curious. Me saying I don't like spirits isn't me saying I don't want to believe in them. I just went through a weird period of my life where I would look up creepy paranormal clips online. Maybe it was an existential crisis looking back. Those creepy clips on social media, they freak me out sometimes though. I feel like looking over my shoulder after I watch them. Nothing really has happened to me though, well, up until this experience. I wouldn't be sharing my story here if nothing happened, would I? One night, I was surfing the net. This was a long while ago. Does anyone remember dial-up internet? Yeah, those times. The kind of times where if you needed to use the phone, then the internet needed to be cut off. Anyways, I was watching a video of some sort, of a paranormal investigation alone in my room, and then all of a sudden, the lights went out. It was so cliche. It wasn't just the lights though. My PC went dark. Everything electrical that was plugged in lost power. I mean, I can look back on it and smile now, but when those lights went out, I was plunged into darkness, and I was absolutely terrified. I felt like a mouse being cornered by a cat. I wondered if it had anything to do with the creepy stuff that I had been watching, and that caused me to freak out. I started shaking. I was living alone at the time, and I have to say that I wish I wasn't. I say that because it was on me to go and check the circuit breaker and to try to get the power back on. The breaker was on the other side of my apartment. I had no choice. I had to leave my bedroom. I crossed the dark hallway and I went in search of the breaker, which was just outside the restroom near the front of my apartment. I went there and I checked the breaker. Luckily, I kept a flashlight by the front door, just in case. I managed to single out the switch that had tripped on the breaker and I flipped it back. It didn't do no good for light because the only light I had on before the power cut was the light in my bedroom. I could see light spilling out from the foot of my bedroom door though, so I felt slightly reassured. I used the bathroom since I was there and I headed back to my room. I felt that that was a good point to end the night and get some shut-eye. I didn't like the short walk back to my bedroom. Something felt very, very wrong about it. I felt as if someone was walking right on my heels, like they could have been close enough for me to feel their breath on the back of my neck. There was definitely something behind me, I was sure of it. I was scared, and this time the fear was worse than feeling as if I was a mouse facing some unseen cat. This felt like I had been plunged into the ocean, and there was no one around for miles and miles who could save me. Normally I would want to spin around and take a good look, but not that night. Something told me not to do that. I just froze there in the hallway, unsure of what I should do next. I heard a noise coming from somewhere behind me. It's so hard to describe this noise, but to me it sounded like a curtain being drawn or a blind being released and allowed to travel as quickly as it liked to the top of the window. It was something jarring is what I mean, like a car door slamming when you're sleeping, or a glass shattering in a restaurant. It was a noise that you just couldn't ignore. It came from within the apartment, like right behind me. It wasn't a house sound. I ran back to my room as fast as I could, and I threw my covers over me. I just curled up in my bed and tried to protect myself. I tried to tell myself that I had just worked myself up because there had been a power cut, and I was watching scary stuff, but some part of me just wouldn't unclench. I was so scared of hearing more noise that I began to get freaked out by the sound of the wall clock's second hand ticking away. That night it seemed deafening. I hadn't ever been bothered by it before, but I also hadn't listened to it in the quiet of the night. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but after a while, I heard another sound. It was like a clicking sound. If you can imagine a switch like a wall plug being turned on or off, it was like that. I was so scared that I wasn't alone in my apartment that night that I thought I was gonna die. I stayed up in my makeshift bed cocoon and tried my best to think of happier thoughts. I guess it must have worked, or my exhaustion won, because before I knew it, I was waking up and it was morning. I went to the bedroom to wash my face. I already imagined how impossible it would be to tell my friends about what happened. There would be no way that they would believe me. As soon as I entered the bathroom for my morning routine, I felt the same feelings I had felt the night before. I felt very strongly that I wasn't alone. I felt as if there was a presence in there with me. I was very aware that the bathroom mirror was right in front of me, and because of all those scary videos I had been watching online, I was determined not to look into that mirror. But I didn't want to be scared in my own home, and I oddly thought that if there was something with me, then perhaps if I saw it, then it might just go away. So I raised my head up and I proudly stared into the mirror. I couldn't see anything but a sleep-deprived and frightened version of myself. Oddly, I couldn't have felt more alone. It was a jarring experience. I don't know what happened that night, but since that power cut, I feel as if something has entered my home. I'm not really sure what I can do about it, but I'm very frightened and aware of something taking up occupancy in my bathroom. I do not feel alone whenever I'm near that room. I'm so freaked out by the memories of having felt that strange presence behind me that I actually kind of moonwalk out of the bathroom back to the safety of my bedroom every time I go in there. It doesn't seem to be all that interested in my bedroom for some unknown reason. I feel like the presence I sensed in the bathroom seems to get stronger by the day. I don't really know what to do, if I'm being honest. I mean, I've put out salt, I've bought an amulet from a nearby shrine. I think I'm safe for the time being, but I just don't know what I'm dealing with or what to do next. I want to move out soon.